The first thing the neighbors remembered was the smell, not smoke, not fire, something older, the kind of rot that clings to wood, seeps into walls, and whispers through the cracks at night. On the morning of September 14th, 1882, the town of Barrow's Hollow awoke to find the Blackwood estate eerily still, doors wide open, curtains trembling in the wind. The family, once the most powerful in the county, was nowhere to be found. What they discovered inside the manor would become one of the most disturbing and unspoken massacres in American history. Blood on the banisters, children's toys scattered across the floor, stained red, a table set for supper but no one alive to eat, and in the center hall a message carved deep into the wood: "We kept the promise, they came anyway." For 140 years this story has been buried, scrubbed from records, silenced in sermons, erased from textbooks. What happened to the Blackwoods was not just murder, it was a ritual, a reckoning, and those who tried to expose it either disappeared or died under suspicious circumstances. This is not folklore, this is not a ghost story. This is history, forgotten because someone wanted it forgotten. Tonight we exhume it. Before the massacre, the Blackwoods were Barrow's Hollow. Their name built the church, owned the orphanage, ran the textile mills, and filled the town coffers. Their estate was more than a mansion. It was a citadel of influence. The family's patriarch, Elijah Blackwood, carried himself like a man ordained by God. The whispers called him something else, the priest without vestments. Locals spoke in hushed tones of their closed gatherings. Windows shuttered, fires burning at odd hours. Children paraded into the house for Sunday lessons, and never seen walking home. The Blackwoods gave generously to the church, yet the pastor himself never spoke during their funerals. Their name demanded silence, but the family's true power lay not in money, it was in the way they buried secrets. Their estate sat atop land older than the town itself, land once belonging to a settlement erased long before Barrow's Hollow was mapped. It was said Elijah purchased it for pennies, but in truth it had been given to him, by whom no one dared to ask. By the summer of 1882, neighbors whispered of strange sounds echoing from the hills, of hymns in languages no one knew, of children screaming, only for the cries to vanish when anyone approached the Blackwood gates, and then silence until the massacre at precisely 3:17 a.m. on the night of September 13th, all dogs in Barrow's Hollow began to howl. Farmers awoke to lanterns flickering, clocks stopped. The moon itself seemed swallowed by cloud, though the sky was clear. Witnesses later described a sound rolling through the valley like church bells, but deeper, older. Some swore it wasn't sound at all, but vibration, a trembling in their teeth and bones. By dawn, the Blackwood house stood open, every lock broken from the inside, every door ajar, and inside carnage. Elijah Blackwood, his wife Margaret, their 4 children, and 3 servants, all dead. But death is too simple a word. Their bodies were arranged. Elijah knelt in the great hall, his eyes sewn shut, his hands clasping a Bible with pages ripped out. His children were seated at the dining table, upright but lifeless, mouths filled with ash. Margaret lay in the nursery, her face turned toward the crib. But the crib was empty, and in the walls, etched with nails or knives, hundreds of small carvings. Circles intersecting with crosses, spirals around blackened handprints, marks that scholars today identify as protective wards or invitations. No one in town could explain it, yet everyone knew in the marrow of their bones that the Blackwoods had been keeping something out, or keeping something in. When county sheriffs rode out from Lexington, they were told to keep their reports brief. The official statement, filed 2 weeks later, listed the cause as domestic violence followed by mass suicide. But the deputy who first entered the home would later confess in a private letter that he'd never seen wounds like that. The children's tongues had been cut neatly as if silenced mid-cry. Margaret's arms bore bruises shaped like hands too large for any man in Barrow's Hollow. Elijah's heart was missing, his chest sewn shut with thread pulled from the family's own drapes. When the deputies searched the basement, they found rows of books locked in iron chests, Latin, Aramaic. Some in scripts no one could decipher. The county ordered them burned, but townsfolk whispered that not all were destroyed, that some made their way into private collections carried off by the same men who swore to protect the community. No one dared bury the Blackwoods. Instead, the house itself was boarded, sealed with chains, and a wooden cross nailed across the front door. But even then, townsfolk claimed to hear voices at night, chanting, crying, or worse, laughter. The sheriff never spoke of it again, and those who asked too many questions found themselves ostracized or worse. The most disturbing detail of the massacre was not the bodies, it was the absence. Margaret Blackwood was found beside an empty crib. Town records confirmed she had given birth in early spring, a daughter named Lydia, yet no trace of the infant was found, no body, no footprints, no clothing. The sheriff's report excluded her entirely, as if she had never existed. But neighbors remembered her. They'd seen the nurse carry the swaddled child on walks. Some recalled the infant crying at night. Others swore they heard lullabies, low and unearthly, drifting from the house. Where Lydia went, and why she was not counted among the dead, remains one of the case's most unsettling mysteries. Some claimed she was taken, others that she was given. A few believed she never existed at all, but was something the Blackwoods had received, rather than birthed. In later years, when strange deaths continued to plague Barrow's Hollow, locals would whisper, "Lydia walks again," but no one dared speak it publicly, because to name her was to invite her. Barrow's Hollow had one institution that rivaled the Blackwood estate in influence, St. Augustine's Orphanage. Run by the Sisters of Mercy, it housed nearly 40 abandoned children, most of whom never left the grounds once admitted. Records from 1882 show that Elijah Blackwood personally funded the orphanage's expansion, though no one knew why. After the massacre, whispers spread. Some children had been seen entering the Blackwood Manor late at night. None were ever seen leaving. Survivors from the orphanage, now elderly, their memories dim, later claimed that Elijah would visit their dormitories, selecting children as though choosing grain at harvest. They were told it was for adoption, but no records exist of any adoptions through the Blackwoods. In the basement of the manor, among the blood and ruins, deputies reported finding dozens of small shoes, some worn, some nearly new, none belonging to the Blackwood children. These details never reached the newspapers. They were struck from the record, replaced by a fabricated narrative of private tutors and family gatherings. What remained was a silence so heavy it seemed enforced. St. Augustine's received more funding after the massacre, and its reputation, strangely, only grew. But among the children, one phrase endured for generations, passed like a secret hymn: "Never follow the lantern to the Blackwood gates." Perhaps the most damning silence came from the pulpit. Reverend Silas Moore of Barrow's Hollow was known as a firebrand preacher, condemning sin in every corner of town. Yet after the massacre, he never spoke the Blackwoods' name again. Parishioners expected a sermon of mourning, of righteous condemnation. Instead, Moore delivered a reading from Revelation, his voice trembling, then closed the Bible mid-chapter and dismissed the congregation. From that day on, he avoided all mention of the family. Some say he burned entire sections of his notes from that week. But in 1914, long after his death, a journal was found hidden behind a false panel in the church vestry. In it, Moore described dreams that began after he performed funerals for 3 of the Blackwood children years earlier. He wrote of standing in the pulpit, only to find the pews filled with eyeless faces. He wrote of hands clawing through the earth under the church floorboards. And he wrote of a warning: "The covenant is older than the cross. I speak nothing, or I invite everything." It seems Moore understood something the townsfolk did not, that to give voice to the Blackwood curse was not remembrance. It was invocation. Barrow's Hollow never spoke of the massacre again. Children were warned never to stray near the Blackwood estate. Adults avoided the subject altogether, turning conversations away with silence or sudden excuses to leave the room. Yet the fear lived on in strange ways. In the years following, townsfolk reported figures in the fields at night, tall, pale shapes carrying lanterns that gave off no light. Farmers claimed to find crops withered in perfect circles, as if burned from beneath. And more than once, children disappeared from their beds, never to be found. The official records called these isolated incidents, blaming wolves, vagrants, or runaways. But locals knew better. They called it the hollowing, a slow draining of life from the valley, as though the ground itself had opened its mouth. Every September, the month of the massacre, families nailed their doors shut from the inside. Windows were covered, mirrors turned toward the wall, and always just before dawn, some claimed to hear it, the tolling of a bell deep in the hills. Though no bell tower stood for miles, the fear was not simply of death. It was of being remembered by something that should have forgotten you. When researchers returned to the site decades later, they discovered something the deputies in 1882 had not reported: shallow graves at the edge of the Blackwood property. Small, unmarked, nearly 24 of them. Some contained only bones the size of a child's arm, others nothing but teeth. Forensic analysis in the 1930s dated the remains to the mid-19th century, long before the massacre, which meant the killings had not begun in 1882. They had been happening for decades, if not longer. Locals believed the graves belonged to orphanage children given to the Blackwoods as offerings. But certain markings on the bones told a darker story, symbols carved directly into the flesh before burial. One anthropologist, whose notes were later confiscated, wrote a single line in the margin: "These are not graves, they are keys." By the early 1900s, the Blackwood estate had become a national curiosity. Ghost hunters, journalists, and occult researchers attempted to document the site. Few lasted more than a night. Some went missing entirely. In 1923, federal agents arrived unannounced. They sealed the property, confiscated all documents relating to the family, and forbade locals from trespassing under threat of imprisonment. No explanation was given. No official report released, yet stories leaked. One agent, discharged in disgrace, claimed they discovered an underground chamber beneath the manor. Its walls were lined with skulls, its floor inscribed with a circle large enough to contain a congregation. He said the chamber was older than the house itself, older than the town, older perhaps than the country, and in its center, carved into stone, was the same phrase found in the hall above: "We kept the promise, they came anyway." Though the massacre was thought to end the Blackwood bloodline, rumors spread that one child survived: Lydia, the missing infant. For years, sightings were reported of a pale girl wandering roads at night, her eyes too dark, her movements too slow, as if her body were learning how to mimic being human. In 1899, a midwife in a neighboring county recorded a disturbing note after assisting with a birth. She claimed the mother, no relation to the Blackwoods, insisted her child was not hers but given to her in a dream. The child bore the name Lydia, though the mother swore she had never chosen it. Other reports tell of families cursed after taking in mysterious orphans, only for their homes to collapse into fire or ruin. One line repeated in folklore across the hollow: "If she knocks, don't answer. If she cries, don't comfort. If she names herself, it is already too late." In 1932, the county courthouse of Barrow's Hollow caught fire. Strangely, only the archives were destroyed: land deeds, birth records, parish registries. Gone. Among the missing files were all documents concerning the Blackwoods and St. Augustine's orphanage. Officials called it an accident, but locals whispered it was deliberate. A custodian who worked the courthouse later revealed that men in dark suits removed several boxes from the basement hours before the fire began. He was warned never to speak of it, but before his death in 1954, he left behind one chilling statement in a sealed letter: "The Blackwoods were not erased, they were hidden, and those who hide them serve the same master." In the 1940s, scholars revisited the Blackwood ruins, this time with modern equipment. What they found carved into the walls shocked even hardened academics. The spirals, circles, and intersecting marks were not random. They matched inscriptions found in Mesopotamian ruins, symbols of covenant and sacrifice, protection and debt. But one symbol appeared repeatedly, always near the children's rooms: a black sun surrounded by 4 hands. It has no known translation. The scholars who attempted to interpret it disagreed violently. One claimed it meant guardian, another insisted it meant devourer. A third, before abandoning the project entirely, simply wrote, "It means both." Of the 5 researchers who worked at the site in 1948, 3 vanished within 2 years. One fell from a train, another disappeared in New Orleans. The third was found drowned, his lungs filled not with water, but with ash. Their notes, however, survived in fragments. They spoke of a hymn heard at night low, humming with no source. Instruments recorded it even when no one was present in the house. The hymn grew louder whenever anyone attempted to translate the inscriptions. The last page of the final scholar's journal reads only, "The song is not memory, it is appetite." Despite its haunted reputation, St. Augustine's orphanage reopened in the 1950s under new management. Children were brought in from across the state. Within weeks, strange events resumed. Children vanishing, lights flickering at night, and an epidemic of night terrors spreading through the dormitories. One orphan described a recurring dream in which a woman with sewn eyes whispered, "The gates are open again." Within a year, the orphanage closed permanently. Its records were sealed. Survivors never spoke publicly, though some tracked down decades later, admitted that the dreams followed them into adulthood. They had families of their own, yet still woke screaming, claiming to see small hands reaching out from under their beds. In 1967, a wealthy private collector purchased several artifacts from the Blackwood ruins at an estate auction. Within months, his mansion in Boston was consumed by fire. Neighbors swore they heard children laughing inside as the flames spread. His body was never recovered. Among the lost items were 3 iron-bound books, rumored to be part of the Blackwood Library. The only surviving record of their contents comes from a catalog entry written before the sale, Book of Severances, Volumes I Roman 3, language indeterminate, not recommended for handling after midnight. The catalog itself vanished from the archive the following year. By the 1970s, Barrow's Hollow was nearly abandoned, yet travelers reported seeing children playing in the fields dressed in 19th century clothing. When approached, they would vanish. One motorist stranded near the ruins claimed a young girl offered to guide him to town. He followed her lantern until he realized the light cast no shadow. The girl stopped at the gates of the Blackwood estate and whispered, "This is where they still wait." The man fled. Days later, his body was found near the river, his tongue missing. By the turn of the century, even the name Blackwood was avoided. Maps erased the estate. Schools no longer taught the town's history, but silence has a cost. The less people spoke of the massacre, the stronger its presence became in whispers, dreams, and sudden tragedies. Locals described it as a hunger in the soil. Crops failed, wells ran dry, birds avoided the valley entirely. Those who moved away reported strange occurrences following them. Footsteps on staircases, lullabies from empty rooms, and a suffocating sense of being watched when they prayed. The massacre had not ended in 1882. It had only planted itself deeper, waiting for silence to ripen. Recent investigations into declassified files suggest the massacre was part of a much larger pattern. Across America, from 1820 to 1940, entire families disappeared under circumstances eerily similar. Children missing, strange carvings on walls, silence enforced by church and state. The Blackwoods were not an anomaly. They were one chapter in a larger hidden history, a history scrubbed clean because it revealed something unbearable, that America itself was built atop boggans no one dares name, that families, churches, and institutions all played their part in feeding it. And the Blackwoods, they were not victims, they were custodians. They kept a promise for as long as they could, until the debt came due. Today, the ruins of the Blackwood estate are nothing but stone and soil. Yet locals insist the air grows colder when you pass by. They say you can still see lanterns in the fields at night, bobbing gently in the dark. Historians dismiss the massacre as myth. Psychologists call it hysteria. But the carvings remain, the graves remain, and the silence remains. Perhaps the most haunting artifact comes from a letter found nailed to a tree near the ruins in 1883. Written in an unsteady hand, it reads, "Do not seek to uncover us, do not name us. We kept the promise, and still, they came." The Blackwood family murders of 1882 are more than forgotten history. They are a warning, a reminder that some silences are not safety but prisons, and when the walls of that prison crack, what escapes does not forget the names of those who once held the keys.